This is Miss Mallows. Today we're going to go over the origins test for Mississippi Studies. And if you can follow along with me on your lesson, I'm just going to read it for you and highlight the special terms on it. In this lesson, you will learn how to identify and describe the regions of Mississippi. Mississippi regions. Mississippi's rich culture and heritage can be found in the state's museums, historical homes, Civil War sites, and landmarks. You can also see it reflected in the impact of the Mississippi River, in the unfolding of the Civil Rights Movement, and in Mississippi's contributions to literature and fine arts and crafts. This is your opportunity to explore every bit of it. Mississippi is located in the southern portion of the United States. Mississippi is named for the Mississippi River, which forms its western boundary and empties into the Gulf of Mexico. The name, roughly translated from Native American folklore, means Father of Waters. Mississippi can be broken down into 7 geographical regions: the Delta, the lowest bluffs and brown loam hills, the red clay hills, the prairies, the northeastern hills, the Pine Belt, and the Gulf Coast. The Mississippi Delta region. It is the delta that most people envision when they try to imagine Mississippi. The Delta region covers the northwest and west central portions of the state. It is part of the flat alluvial plain that runs along the east bank of the Mississippi River from Memphis to Vicksburg, and then in a very narrow strip south to Natchez. The area was once a huge arm of the Gulf of Mexico that extended deep into the center of the North American continent. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the Mississippi River and its tributaries have deposited incomprehensible amounts of silt from the interior of the continent, slowly but surely building up land where the sea once lay. Every spring until very recently, the river has deposited this rich silt onto the land, providing some of the most fertile soil on the planet. The region is bordered on the east by the Yazoo River. At its widest point, it is about 80 miles wide. It includes the cities of Greenville, Tunica, and Clarksdale. Because the threat of flooding occurred every year, few farmers moved to the Delta before the Civil War. After levees were built in the 1870s and 1880s to reduce the dangers of annual flooding, the population in the Delta began to grow. After the Civil War, ex-slaves settled into the region, working the large plantations as sharecroppers. The great wealth of the Delta came from sharecropping. Delta landowners grew rich and held a powerful position in the state's government, a power that was resented by the poorer farmers in the hill countries. Lower Delta agriculture evolved during the 20th century into large farms owned by non-resident corporate entities. These heavily mechanized, low-labor, capital-intensive farm entities, which owned hundreds and thousands of acres, produced market-driven crops such as cotton, sugar, rice, and soybeans. The mechanization of agriculture and the availability of domestic work outside the Delta spurred the migration of Delta residents out of the region. From the 1960s through the 1990s, thousands of small farms and dwellings in the Delta region were absorbed by large corporate-owned agribusinesses. Small, stagnant Delta communities were the result of this great migration. In recent years, due to the growth of the automobile industry in the South, many parts suppliers have opened facilities in the Delta as well as on the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River, which is another area of immense poverty. Moreover, the 1990s legalization of casino gambling in Mississippi has boosted the Delta's economy, particularly in the areas of Tunica and Vicksburg. Before the casinos sprang up out of the cotton fields, the Delta was famous for being the birthplace of the blues. The Delta blues is one of the earliest styles of blues music. Guitar and harmonica are the dominant instruments heard in this genre. The vocal styles range from introspective and soulful to passionate and fiery. Today, cities like Greenwood and Greenville are known for hosting lively festivals celebrating the area's rich musical and cultural heritage. Today, the Mississippi Delta is known for its backstreet juke joints, internationally acclaimed restaurants, and good old Southern hospitality. Okay, moving to the Loess Bluffs and Brown Loam Hills. Antebellum cotton plantations were located mainly in the Loess and Brown Loam Hills to the east and south of the Delta. The Loess Hills border the eastern edge of Mississippi's alluvial plain in a thin strip that runs the entire western length of the state. This narrow region is only 5 to 15 miles wide. Prehistoric dust storms swept across the alluvial plain from the west, depositing the glacial silt which makes up these hills. Loess soil is very fertile and loosely packed. Rain or irrigated water dissolves a plowed Loess field the same way that water dissolves sugar. Early farmers knew little about soil conservation, and as a result, the Loess Hills have suffered from harsh erosion. Merging with the Loess Hills on their eastern edge is a wider belt of brown loam soil, which also stretches from Tennessee to Louisiana. Sadly, the history of this region could serve as a case study for soil abuse. Before the Civil War, the Brown Loam Belt was an attractive region for farmers, and the area contained many large plantations. After the Civil War, this region went into economic decline, and many farmers left their farms in a state of depravity after misusing the soil for years. By the time the Civil War had come to an end, this soil had been robbed of most of its fertility. Poor farming techniques eroded the soil, leaving enormous washed-out gullies. Various soil conservation methods have been introduced to the region in hopes of restoring its value and in an effort to stop erosion. To combat the problem, conservationists in the 1930s imported a Chinese plant called kudzu, which was used in China to contain the same Loess bluff formations found there. Today, kudzu is a major annoyance as it grows anywhere and everywhere. It spreads so fast that some people swear that you can actually see it growing. Where kudzu has not completely taken over, the Loess and Brown Loam Hills are extremely fertile, though not nearly as fertile as the alluvial soil of the Mississippi Delta. In the last 60 years, the region has slowly begun to recover. The economy of this region is no longer dependent on cotton farms, but bases its income on cattle ranching, light manufacturing, and trade. Okay, next is the Red Clay Hills. The entire Red Clay Hills region forms a large triangle in north-central Mississippi, the primary portion of which runs down the middle of the state from Tennessee and then curves east to Alabama. Its name comes from the region's red-colored soil and the significant number of clay deposits found there. Consisting greatly of clay, the soil is of poor quality. Therefore, few plantations developed there. The original settlers of this region maintained small farms. Eventually, farming in most of the region became impractical, being replaced by raising livestock, timber cutting, and small factories. Economically, the region's history is one of poverty. While the population of the Red Clay Hills is predominantly European American and African American, the region is also home to a number of other ethnic communities, each with their own distinct traditions. The members of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians who live here are well known for their basket making and social dance traditions. Many immigrants from India also live in the region, sharing their culture through hosted events of Indian dance and music. The Red Clay Hills is also home to most of the state's small but growing Hispanic population. The next part of the land of Mississippi is the prairies. Prairies are regions with large areas of rolling grasslands and few forests. There are two prairie regions in Mississippi, the largest of which is the Black Prairie, or referred to in Mississippi as the Tombigbee Prairie. This prairie follows the west bank of the Tombigbee River from Alcorn County in the north to Noxubee County on the Alabama border. It is actually part of a much larger prairie that continues into Alabama called the Alabama Black Belt. It is the second most fertile region in the state. The rich soil of the region was ideal for cotton farming. Therefore, large plantations were established in the area prior to the Civil War. While some cotton is still grown here, soybeans and cattle have since replaced cotton as the dominant crops coming out of the Tombigbee Prairie. In the past couple of decades, cities in this region have been some of the fastest growing economies within the state, like Jackson. Many great examples of classic Southern architecture still survive in the Black Prairie towns. To the south of the Red Clay Hills is the Jackson or Central Prairie region. It is the same prairie system that encompasses the Pine Belt, except that the land is less abundantly forested with wide rolling grasslands that are easily converted to farmland. The soil is also less sandy than that of the Pine Belt. As a result, the Central Prairie is the third most fertile farming region in the state. Cotton is traditionally the staple crop, although it has been replaced with soybeans and corn. Cattle are also pastured on large rolling fields. The main cities of the Central Prairie are Jackson, Canton, Philadelphia, Morton, and Meridian. The Northern Hills, or the Highlands region. The hills of northeastern Mississippi house the highest elevated points in the state. At over 800 feet high, Woodall Mountain in Tishomingo County is the state's highest point. The northeastern hills are made up of three subregions: the Ten Tom Hills, the Pontotoc River, and the Flatlands. The northeastern hills are the foothills of the southwestern tip of the Great Appalachian Chain, making the region geographically and culturally more like that of Middle Tennessee than the rest of Mississippi. The thin soil covers the rocky base of the Appalachian Chain and can only sustain minimal family farming. In the antebellum era, few of the white settlers who moved into this region could afford slaves and had little need for them if they could. As a result, this region is home to the fewest number of African Americans in any other part of the state. The northeastern hills has enjoyed much economic growth in recent years. The people of the northeastern hills learned the benefit of modern technology and industry when the Tennessee Valley Authority provided the region with cheap electrical power. Then the people of the region have eagerly welcomed modern industry into their communities. In 1985, the completion of the Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway, linking the Tennessee River with the Port of Mobile and the Gulf of Mexico, also encouraged new industrial development to move into the region. The Pine Belt region. Located south of the Jackson Prairie and east of the Lowest Bluffs and Brown Lawn Hills, the region known as the Pine Belt was a spectacular forest of longleaf pines when the first European settlers came to Mississippi. The beautiful pine trees were 100 feet tall, some of which measured 6 feet in diameter. Few settlers moved into this region due to the soil, which is a mixture of sand and clay and therefore not conducive to a large-scale agricultural development. Before the Civil War, the people who lived in this region earned a living primarily through herding livestock and cutting timber, which was floated downriver to sawmills on the Gulf Coast. After the Civil War, the Pine Belt enjoyed a season of economic growth. Railroads were built, and a large number of lumbermen moved into the region to cut and market the pine timber. In the 50 years from 1880 to 1930, the pine forests were entirely cleared and economic depression set in. However, beneath the land lies the second source of wealth for the Pine Belt: petroleum. After World War II, the petroleum industry surpassed the lumber industry as the main source of wealth. Through careful land management and the replanting of cut trees, the pine forests have come back, restoring timber as a central source of the Pine Belt economy. The Gulf Coast or coastal terrace region. Coming by way of the sea, the Mississippi Gulf Coast was the first Mississippi region to be settled by French explorers. As the soil of the coastal terrace is very sandy, the land was never developed for agricultural purposes. Instead, the region has depended on its resources from the sea and on tourism. The population of the Gulf Coast remained small throughout the 19th century. The lumber boom taking place in the Pine Belt began to affect the coastal region, and the city of Gulfport sprang up around 1900 as a lumber seaport. Industry, along with a growth in population, accompanied World War II in the Gulf Coast region. Today, the Gulf Coast counties are some of Mississippi's most urbanized areas. The introduction of casinos into the area provided a boost and a growing share in the coast economy. While fishing had been the dominant industry in the region, there was a sharp decline in production due to overfishing and pollution. Jackson County is the most industrialized area of all of Mississippi, supporting petroleum refining, chemicals, a paper mill, and a shipbuilding yard. The Gulf Coast is home to more military service members and veterans than any other area of the state due to the naval base in Gulfport, the now closed naval base in Pascagoula, and the U.S. Air Force Base in Biloxi. The Gulf Coast is the most ethnically diverse region of Mississippi. Originally populated by the French over 300 years ago, the area is still home to many descendants of the original settlers. They live alongside the descendants of Yugoslav immigrants who came less than 100 years ago, and with the Vietnamese refugees who arrived after 1975. The area has also seen more immigration from other states within the U.S. than any other region of Mississippi. The Barrier Islands lie some 10 to 20 miles offshore. These islands consist of sand dunes that barely break the waves of the sea. They are generally only a half mile to a mile wide and several miles long. Marshy lagoons support diverse and delicate wildlife in the interior of these islands. The islands serve an important geological function. They protect the mainland from the ravages of sea weather, sparing the mainland the brunt of the frequent hurricanes that make landfall here. The islands are generally uninhabited except for tourists, sun worshippers, and sportsmen who arrive by boat on day-long excursions. Okay, now I'm going to go over the vocabulary words for the things we've talked about. I'm just going to pronounce the words for you, but you may want to refer back to this when you have a test because a lot of the test questions will just be asking you for definitions. First, you have the alluvial plain, next the barrier islands, the Black and Central Prairies, coastal terrace, Delta Blues, Delta Region, Father of Waters, Juke Joint, Kudzu, Low S Bluffs and Brown Lum Belt, Northeast Hills, Pine Belt, Red Clay Hills, and sharecropping. I hope this helped you for the first test, which is the Origins test on Mississippi Studies. Good luck.